2034. The year technological advancements reached a fever pitch, and the world became drunk with the power of its own discovery. Yet behind the thin veneer of progress lay secrets too dark to share. Secrets that should have remained buried. Deep within the harsh, unforgiving landscape of the Talavera badlands, where the sun baked the earth into cracked mosaics and the wind carried whispers of lost things, the echo-deep base stood as a sentinel of the unknown. Lieutenant Adrian Cole leaned over the observation deck railing, his gaze fixed on the horizon that stretched endlessly into oblivion. The Badlands were a place where light felt sickly and weak, devoured by the immense shadows that shifted over the craggy terrain. A bead of sweat traced its way down his temple, cold despite the midday heat. He knew something was off, more than just the usual tension that came with the classified work at Echo Deep. It had been weeks since their latest probe ventured into the magnetic dead zone, a stretch of land where compasses whirled madly and radio waves died in the silence of some unseen force. No report, no signal, until today. Now every nerve in Cole's body stood on edge, vibrating with the premonition he could not shake. Behind him, the control room buzzed with low chatter, punctuated by the rapid clicking of keys and the subtle hum of fluorescent lights. Dr. Miriam Ashcroft was a figure of calculated intensity, her eyes hidden behind thick lenses that magnified the severity of her gaze. She was poring over the waveforms on the monitor, her fingers tight around the pen she held, the knuckles turning pale. Every flicker of the screen reflected off her glasses, giving her the appearance of someone staring into a fire she couldn't control. "Cole," she said, not bothering to look up. "We're getting it again." The room fell silent as if the air had been sucked out. The crackle of static came first, irregular and distant, like an echo bouncing off the walls of a cave. But then the sound shifted, became more cohesive. A clicking noise, rhythmic and deliberate, resonated from the speakers. It started slow, then built into a jagged, staccato burst. It was language, but not one born of any human throat. Ashcroft's pen dropped, rolling off the desk and clattering to the floor. The noise made Cole flinch, a small betrayal of the iron control he usually kept over himself. He glanced at the soldiers stationed nearby. Hardened men and women, faces etched with lines of discipline and battle, now stood transfixed, eyes wide and pupils dilated. "Get this recorded and analyzed," Ashcroft ordered, her voice cracking with an edge she couldn't hide. The clicking gave way to a sound that made Cole's blood freeze, a series of screeches, like metal rending, but interwoven with something organic, almost a sob or a scream. It was primal, raw with intent. It spoke not just to their ears, but to something ancient and fearful, buried deep within their bones. The base's lights flickered, the hum of power surging through cables, vibrating the steel floors. The clicking came back, insistent and louder, building into a crescendo that rattled the equipment. Cole's jaw tightened as he noticed frost begin to creep up the metal panels around the room, condensing into tiny beads that shimmered and burst like glass. "Lieutenant, look at this," Ashcroft whispered, drawing his attention to the monitor. The waveform pulsed in erratic peaks, red lines flaring like warning lights. But it wasn't just the pattern that made Cole's chest constrict. It was the synchronization. The room itself seemed to vibrate with the same alien pulse. "It's reacting," she said, more to herself than anyone else. The radio signal wasn't just a message, it was an answer, an acknowledgement. Before Cole could process, the base's overhead lights dimmed, replaced by the emergency glow of crimson. The intercom crackled with feedback before a low, droning hum filled the room, vibrating deep into the marrow of their bones. The few words that came through the static were distorted, garbled, and worse. They weren't spoken in any language on record. Cole's vision swam as the temperature dropped further, the air now biting with frost. He glanced at the observation window. Outside, the horizon rippled, a distortion like heat waves, but dark and slick, creeping across the expanse. The badlands, once silent and still, had become a canvas for movement, shadows playing tricks on his eyes or something more, something alive and watching. Ashcroft reached out, touching Cole's arm as if to steady herself. "We shouldn't have listened," she whispered, her voice small, a prayer swallowed by the weight of realization. The clicking resumed, louder now, a relentless rhythm echoing in their ears as if something immense and sentient was awakening beneath their feet. The walls of Echo Deep trembled, and in the distance, a rumbling roar sounded, a call that had been met, a response that promised nothing but annihilation. Echo Deep had been a fortress, a labyrinth of reinforced steel and state-of-the-art technology designed to withstand anything Earth or man could throw at it. But it wasn't Earth or man they faced now. The morning sun cast long, jagged shadows across the Talavera badlands, a fractured, red-tinged terrain that seemed to mock the team as they geared up for reconnaissance. A chill lingered in the air, a reminder of the unnatural cold that had swept through the base the night before. Cole's breaths came shallow, visible in the dim light. The radio transmission still played in his head, a nightmare with teeth. "Lieutenant Cole, are you sure about this?" Specialist Ramirez, barely 22 with sharp eyes that belied his age, adjusted the strap of his rifle. His voice was steady, but the tremor in his fingers told a different story. Cole glanced at him, then at the other two soldiers, Private Lung and Sergeant Hale. They were all wearing the base's environmental suits, which hissed softly with the pressure of filtered air. The suits offered a thin barrier against the unknown, but nothing could ease the gnawing fear in Cole's gut. "We're not going in blind," Cole lied, more to himself than to the others. "We're retrieving data. In and out." The fissure lay a half-mile from the base, a gaping wound in the earth that no map had ever marked. It appeared the morning after the first signal, as if whatever force stirred beneath the surface had torn itself free from the bonds of stone and earth. The crack pulsed with a dull glow, veins of luminescent blue stretching into the distance like ghostly rivers. The team advanced, boots crunching on the gravel, the only sound against the eerie stillness of the badlands. Every step closer to the fissure brought a deepening silence, an oppressive void that seemed to swallow their voices and breaths. Cole signaled a stop and knelt, peering into the darkness below. The rift was deep, unfathomably so, disappearing into a blackness that repelled the probing beams of their flashlights. "Lieutenant, look!" Ramirez's voice broke the silence, tight with disbelief. He pointed to the fissure's edge where the soil shifted, rippling as if stirred by an unseen current. Cole took a cautious step forward and felt the vibration, subtle, like a heartbeat. His flashlight swept across the edge and caught movement. It emerged with an unnatural fluidity, like mercury given life. A tendril, translucent yet solid, covered in pulsating, fractal-like patterns that moved in hypnotic waves. The appendage hovered for a moment before slithering toward the light, responding to it like a moth to flame. Cole's instincts screamed for him to back away, but his feet remained rooted as curiosity warred with terror. Private Leung gasped, the sound breaking the moment's spell. Cole snapped out of his trance just as the tendril lashed forward. Ramirez moved to react, but it was too fast. The appendage coiled around his arm, translucent skin pressed against his suit. A scream ripped from Ramirez's throat as the material of his suit darkened, the veins beneath glowing blue. The suit crackled and hissed as the substance corroded, burning through layers of protective fabric to skin, melting it with an audible sizzle. "Cut it off," Leung shouted, lunging forward with his blade. The tendril released with a shriek that rattled in their bones, retracting back into the fissure as swiftly as it appeared. Ramirez fell to his knees, clutching his arm, where dark, oily veins pulsed and spread from the wound, glowing faintly beneath his skin. Sergeant Hale activated his emergency transmitter, voice breaking through the static. "Echo Deep, this is Alpha Team. We need immediate evac. Hostile contact confirmed. Ramirez is down. Repeat, Ramirez is down." The ground beneath them shuddered, a low, resonant vibration that sent rocks skittering. Cole watched in horror as more appendages began to emerge, writhing and twisting, their surfaces reflecting the pale light like an oil slick. The fissure was no longer a simple crack in the earth. It was a gateway, a wound in reality itself. "Fall back," Cole shouted, gripping Ramirez under one arm as Hale and Leung flanked them, weapons ready. The team retreated, hearts pounding as the air filled with a guttural chittering, a sound that seeped into their ears and minds, echoing like an ancient chant. Cole glanced back and caught sight of something deeper within the fissure. A shape, colossal and almost imperceptible against the shadows. A structure, or perhaps an entity, its surface a writhing mass of tendrils and eyes that opened and shut in rapid succession, each glistening orb reflecting the small, struggling figures at the surface. As they crossed the safe perimeter marked by the emergency flares, the noise behind them reached a fever pitch and then abruptly ceased. The silence that followed was worse, a reminder that the thing below was not just a creature, but something vast, calculating, and patient. Cole's eyes met Ramirez's, now glassy and dull as the glowing veins in his arms slowed and darkened. Ramirez whispered something, his voice barely audible. "It's awake," he said before his eyes rolled back and he convulsed, collapsing in Cole's arms. The horizon darkened as a thick, pulsating mist rose from the fissure, stretching out like fingers of smoke, reaching hungrily for the base. The mission was over, but the nightmare had just begun. Echo Deep had encountered something more than an anomaly. They had roused a being that should have remained undisturbed, and now it watched them, listened to them, and learned. The hours following the mission's return blurred into a cacophony of panic and dread. The infirmary, a sterile expanse that had once been a sanctuary from the desert's brutality, now felt suffocating. Harsh white lights glared down on Ramirez's prone body, casting deep shadows over his pallid face and the black veins creeping up his arm. Dr. Miriam Ashcroft bent over him, the sterile cloth mask doing little to conceal the tremble in her lips as she tried to assess the extent of the corruption. "Hold him steady," she snapped at Private Lung, who struggled to maintain composure as Ramirez's body spasmed beneath his grip. The glowing veins pulsed, spreading across the soldier's chest like roots searching for purchase, a malevolent network weaving beneath his skin. Cole stood at the doorway, hands curled into fists so tight his nails bit into his palms. The rest of the room was a chorus of beeping monitors and urgent shouts as the medical team scrambled. The air smelled of antiseptic and something else, something sour and metallic. He shifted his gaze to Ashcroft, whose face was slick with sweat as she whispered to herself, repeating phrases under her breath like a mantra. She glanced up, locking eyes with Cole. "It's integrating," she said, voice hollow. "It's adapting." The words were a hammer to his chest. Ramirez's breathing turned ragged, interrupted by wet gurgles. His eyes fluttered open, glazed with a milky film, pupils shrinking to pinpricks that darted about as if trying to track something just out of sight. The room seemed to hold its breath as he rasped a single word: cold. A strangled gasp cut through the room as Ramirez's back arched, muscles seizing into impossible rigidity. His mouth opened in a silent scream, the veins beneath his skin igniting with that same eerie phosphorescent blue. The lights flickered, a buzzing noise rising until it crescendoed with a sudden pop, plunging the room into dim emergency light. Before anyone could react, the base's alarm system roared to life, a deep, pulsating klaxon that vibrated in Cole's chest. He spun on his heel and bolted down the corridor, the metal grating echoing beneath his boots. The automated voice of the base's system intoned over the chaos. "Warning. Perimeter breach. Unidentified movement detected. All units to combat stations." Echo Deep's core, usually a well-oiled machine of stoic personnel and disciplined soldiers, devolved into barely contained chaos. The control center, lined with screens and consoles, became a storm of shouting officers and flashing red indicators. Sergeant Hale, his face smeared with dust and exhaustion, appeared at Cole's side, rifle slung across his chest. "Lieutenant, you need to see this," Hale said, voice strained. Cole followed him to the main observation panel where the exterior cameras fed grainy, static-laden footage of the base's perimeter. Shapes moved in the dark, half hidden by swirling clouds of dust and that strange, luminous mist. They shifted and jerked, limbs bending in ways that defied anatomy, bodies flickering between solidity and something more ethereal. Their eyes, or what passed for eyes, glowed with an unnatural light, each one a pale, mirrored orb that reflected the base's floodlights. "Jesus," someone muttered, voice cracking. The creatures stood just outside the razor-wire fences, silent and patient, their gazes fixed on the base. One stepped forward, the movement rippling through its semi-translucent body, as if it were more liquid than flesh. It pressed a hand-like appendage against the fence, and a wave of blue light traveled along the metal, crackling and hissing until it snapped with a metallic shriek. The fence split and fell, reduced to molten fragments that hissed on the cold ground. Ashcroft appeared at Cole's side, eyes wide behind her glasses. "They're testing us," she whispered, horror dawning in her expression. The control center shuddered as a deep, resonant hum coursed through the walls. The screens flickered and static buzzed in the overhead speakers. Then came the chittering, low at first, but growing louder, merging into a droning chant that seemed to vibrate through their bones. Cole felt the noise more than heard it. It was a presence, invasive and suffocating. The sound of gunfire echoed from the southern quadrant. Shouts over the radio melded into unintelligible screams. Cole snatched the receiver, his voice hoarse. "All units, hold your positions. Do not engage directly. Fall back to secondary defenses." The transmission returned only static, interspersed with bursts of muffled yells and something more sinister. The same chittering, but amplified, almost gleeful. Suddenly the ground quaked with such force that consoles toppled, scattering equipment across the floor. The main view screen flickered and then switched to an overhead feed. The fissure, once a narrow scar in the earth, had widened. It pulsed, a seething, living thing, and from its depths emerged a towering figure, its silhouette jagged and segmented, plates of glistening obsidian-like material shifting as if breathing. Multiple limbs unfurled, each lined with rows of needle-like protrusions that writhed as if tasting the air. Ashcroft grabbed Cole's arm, nails digging in. "It's coming. We woke it, and now it's coming." Outside, the creatures that had lingered at the perimeter began to move in unison, their fluid forms slithering and bounding toward the base with terrifying speed. The control center erupted in a frenzy as lights dimmed and sirens wailed. Cole turned to face his team. The control room now a battlefield of panic. "We hold this base," he commanded, voice cutting through the noise. "We hold it or we fall." Hale and the others braced themselves, eyes reflecting the pale alien light that now seeped through the cracks of the facility's reinforced walls. The chittering outside rose to a deafening crescendo as the first of the creatures reached the entrance, their limbs splintering metal with ease. Cole lifted his rifle and felt a cold that was not just in the air, but inside him, clawing up his spine. The last vestiges of hope dissolved as the walls buckled, and the control center was flooded with that luminous, pulsating mist. The base groaned like a dying animal, its metal bones bending under the weight of an unimaginable force. Sparks rained from the damaged ceiling, casting brief flashes of harsh white light over the exhausted faces of the defenders. Lieutenant Adrian Cole stood at the center of the chaos, eyes darting between the survivors who clutched weapons with trembling hands, and the control panel that flickered, gasping its last breath. The alien chittering outside had risen into a cacophony, a victorious chant that echoed through the halls, reverberating in their skulls. "Status report," Cole shouted, his voice hoarse from a mix of smoke and fear. Sergeant Hale's response was immediate, but grim. "Southern entrance is gone, breached within minutes. West barricade holding by a thread." He paused, eyes hollow and sunken. "They're inside the perimeter." Cole swallowed hard, the taste of ash and sweat bitter on his tongue. He locked eyes with Dr. Miriam Ashcroft, who stood beside a sputtering monitor that displayed nothing but static intercut with ghostly flashes of the creatures outside. Her glasses were cracked, and dried blood matted the hair at her temple. Despite everything, she met his gaze with a thin veneer of resolve. "There's only one option left," she said, voice taut. Her fingers hovered over the control console, shaking. "The EMP burst. It might give us a chance. A moment." "A moment for what?" Hale demanded, desperation cracking his voice. "We're not getting out of this alive, and you damn well know it." Cole felt the weight of those words settle like lead in his chest. He looked past the shattered glass of the control room window to the hallway beyond, where Private Leung and two others aimed their rifles into the smoke-filled corridor, flinching at every distant scream and metallic thud. The creatures were methodical, relentless, breaking down doors with insect-like precision, limbs clicking and twitching in a rhythm that bordered on mechanical. "Lieutenant," Ashcroft said, drawing him back. Her eyes glistened, reflecting the faint blue glow that seeped through the cracks in the walls. "It won't kill them, but it'll disrupt their synchronization. It might buy us enough time to..." "To what?" Cole interrupted, his voice low. "We're boxed in. There's no fallback, no evac. What's the point?" "The point," Ashcroft said, her voice shaking now, "is that it's not just us. If we fall, whatever this is, it spreads. It finds more places, more people. We need to try." A heavy silence settled between them, broken only by the distant rhythmic pounding that signaled the creature's progress. Cole nodded once, the decision wrenching something loose inside him. He turned to Hale, who clenched his jaw and gave a tight nod. Ashcroft's fingers danced over the console, activating the sequence. Red warning lights flooded the room, accompanied by the shrill beep of the EMP timer counting down. 30 seconds. Cole reached for the radio and pressed the button, broadcasting to any channel still functioning. "All personnel, this is Lieutenant Cole. Prepare for an electromagnetic pulse. Brace yourselves and hold the line. We don't stop until the last breath." The static answered him like a cruel joke. 20 seconds. The creatures were inside now. The first of them appeared at the end of the hallway, its silhouette grotesque and fluid, eyes like mercury reflecting the crimson warning lights. It moved in staccato bursts, limbs twitching as if mimicking human hesitation. Then it surged forward, joined by two more that spilled into the corridor behind it. Leung opened fire, the staccato bark of gunfire filling the room. The bullets tore through the nearest creature, and it shattered like liquid glass, reforming an instant later, parts glistening and melding seamlessly. 10 seconds. Cole clenched his jaw and raised his rifle, the noise and chaos narrowing to a singular focus. Ashcroft whispered something he couldn't make out, her lips moving in what might have been a prayer or a curse. The creature's chittering surged, a triumphant symphony that drowned out the screams as they reached the barricade, metal shrieking as it twisted and bent. 5 seconds. The control panel flashed, an electric blue glow sparking across the room as the EMP activated. A deep, resonant boom shuddered through the base, and for a moment, everything froze. The creatures stopped mid-advance, their liquid eyes widening as the luminous veins coursing through their bodies flared and cracked. Then, they screamed. A sound so deep and primal it bypassed thought and went straight to terror. The lights flickered, and in that split second Cole saw them thrash, limbs contorting in an unnatural dance as if fighting an invisible force. The glow in their eyes dulled, the synchronization breaking. But the respite was fleeting. The EMP effect faded, and the creatures, now frenzied, erupted with renewed aggression. One launched itself into the control room, shattering the glass and sending Ashcroft sprawling across the floor. Cole fired point blank as the creature's form shimmered, reforming around the bullets as if absorbing them. It lashed out, a tendril catching him across the chest and hurling him against the wall. The pain was blinding, and the air rushed from his lungs. He gasped, trying to rise, but the room spun. Hale grabbed Ashcroft, dragging her back as another creature breached, moving with a twitching, chaotic energy. The base's structure groaned, an agonized wail that seemed to echo Cole's last thought. They had lost. The creatures were learning, adapting, and now they knew how to breach not just steel, but flesh and bone. Ashcroft's face, streaked with dirt and blood, appeared in his blurry vision. She screamed something at him, but it was lost beneath the roar of tearing metal and the chittering chorus. One last glance at her, and he understood. She was saying goodbye. A shape filled the shattered doorway, massive and regal, with a body of chitinous plates that moved like liquid obsidian, crowned with eyes that glistened with cold, detached intelligence. It was their harbinger, the heart of the nightmare that had lain dormant beneath Talavera. With the last of his strength, Cole reached for the emergency panel, hand slick with blood, and pulled the override lever. The base shuddered one final time as the containment system activated, sealing Echo Deep in a tomb of iron and stone. The creatures paused as if considering this new development. Cole exhaled, the room spinning away into a dark blur. The hum of the containment doors echoed, a lullaby of despair as the final roar of the outside world fell silent. Echo Deep was buried, its last defenders entombed with the secrets of what they had awakened. And beyond the suffocating darkness, the alien chittering receded, an ominous promise that one day it would rise again.